Behavior Intervention Services series. All behavior happens for a reason, behavior as communication. Today's presenters are Janine Waddell and Rachel Perella. So let me get started, and ladies, take it away.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Mary Beth, and of course the Parent Resource Center for hosting us tonight. On behalf of Behavior Intervention Services, it is an absolute pleasure to be spending our evening together with our parents, guardians, and families, and having this conversation about behavior and why it happens, and looking at behavior as communication. I will let you know that I will be turning my camera off as we present in order to help support with our connectivity and the quality of the presentation tonight. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. We have provided you with a participant packet to help address the how of implementation as we go through this presentation tonight. Please use the packet to take notes and connect these strategies to your student. This presentation was created to address the needs of both older and younger students and students of varying abilities. You know your student best, so I invite you to connect the material in this presentation to the specific and unique needs of your student. So during our training tonight, we are going to focus on a positive approach to behavior change. We will review how behaviors are learned through antecedents and consequences. We will discuss why behaviors occur and connect how executive function strategies and acknowledging positive behaviors can be used to support teaching new behaviors. By the end of this training, our goal is for you to be able to identify how behaviors are learned and the reason why behaviors occur. You will be able to identify the connection between executive function skills and challenging behavior and apply information about the function of behavior, which is the why, to identify and teach what we refer to as replacement behaviors. Behavior change as a proactive approach. As we go through this behavior change journey together, we want to remember the behavior change process takes time and strategies are different for each learner. We want to approach behavior change in a positive way. One of the simplest ways we can do this is to provide feedback to our student when they are doing what is expected or desired, or catch them when they do it and give them that feedback. Consistency is also important. Consistency does not mean 100% perfect. It just means that even when it is hard to do, try your best. We also want to remember that behaviors are skills that can be taught just like math or reading. We do this through teaching and providing feedback. Before we get started, I would like to invite you to take a moment to look at these pictures on the screen. Which picture best describes your thoughts on challenging behavior at home? We're going to do this as a poll. So choose a photo that best describes your thoughts on challenging behavior at home. Would it be A, B, C, or D? A is, oh, it's okay, I'm just chilling. B is, I'm really upset. C is, I'm pulling my hair out. And D is, meh, whatever, and rolling my eyes. What photo here best describes your thoughts on challenging behavior at home? Oh, I'm seeing some 2s and some 3s. Okay, so I'm seeing just really being upset about it and maybe pulling our hair out. I'm seeing some of those come through right now. I'm seeing, oh, yep, we're still coming through with some of them. Fantastic. Oh, we see another B, very like some upset when those challenging behaviors happen? All right, let's see what our final results are. So C is our winner with 14, and then close behind is our B. So the results of this poll show us how important it is that we're here tonight having these conversations and talking about what this feels like. So now that we've had a moment to reflect about our thoughts on these challenging behaviors, did you notice each image was a communication by each individual? When we are working together with our student, we want to keep in mind that their behavior is part of the communication process. Being a detective and observing the behavior of our student can often tell us what may need to change in the environment. Today, we are going to be talking about behavior as communication, and I will be inviting you all throughout this presentation to reflect upon the needs of your student and how best you can support. This is because in this behavior change journey, we do the work together with our student. Behavior is communication. At its core, all behavior is communication, and viewing it as such will allow us to see behavior objectively and respond proactively. Behavior can be increased, it can be decreased, and it can be measured. All behavior has a function, which is the reason why the behavior is happening. Behaviors can absolutely be taught, learned, and modified. Behavior is complex. So, with objectivity, knowledge, and perseverance, we can make a change. Communication can be positive, negative, effective, or ineffective. Behavior is the way your student communicates. The behavior can be a tantrum or simply rolling of their eyes. Let's think of that challenging behavior as a signal, a way in which the student is communicating something very important to you. By understanding what your student is trying to express, you can better respond to their needs and help your student learn more positive ways to communicate. So how are behaviors learned? Behaviors are learned from the experiences and interactions we have with our environment. Please refer to page 1 of your participant packet to see this visual and to take notes if you wish. So, in this graphic, we have our antecedent. This is what happens before the behavior. For example, it could be an instructional demand, or a preferred activity ended, or maybe a transition occurred. Then we have a behavior. The behavior is one's interaction with the environment. It is measurable, it's observable, and objective. For example, hitting, or getting out of their seat, or verbal refusal of a direction. Behaviors can also be asking for help, or using a checklist, using a self-control strategy such as deep breathing. And we also have consequences. Consequences are the events that happen immediately after the behavior. Consequences are not the same as punishment. This antecedent, behavior, and consequence model is key when behavior change is desired. Behavior change occurs when we adjust the antecedent and consequence of a behavior. An ABC chart is often used to document the events occurring in the student's environment. So let's take a look at our antecedent, which is what occurs immediately before the behavior. To begin this process, we want to continue being a behavior detective and observe the events occurring in the environment. I often see my student going straight to her room after dinner. The antecedent is that my husband said, "Hey everyone, let's all clean up the dinner dishes together." The direction occurred right before my student left the kitchen. So an antecedent can be a direction, it can be a presence of a person or item, or even an activity. change in the environment or the setting, or even the structure of the environment. Behavior is one's interaction with the environment. When defining the behavior, we want it to be in measurable, observable, and objective terms. Each time I ask my daughter to empty the dishwasher or put away the laundry, she says, okay. Her eyes roll and the volume of her voice increases. I find that I have to ask her multiple times. The behaviors I see can be measured, they're observable, and stated in objective terms. A non-example would sound something like, oh, she's so disrespectful, or he never does anything I ask. These observations lead me to begin to connect the antecedents and behaviors together to see possible patterns. Let's take a moment and look at these two pictures. Both behaviors are communicating the same thing. One is just expected and what people may call appropriate or pro-social, and the other is unexpected and what people may call inappropriate or maladaptive. Behavior itself is an interaction between an individual and his or her environment. And when we think about behaviors, we want to make sure we are thinking and speaking about them in measurable, observable, and objective ways. Expression of behavior can also be very subtle. For example, facial expressions are important to observe, such as an eye roll or scrunching of the face, or when your student's eyebrows get all furrowed. Vocal expressions, such as grunting or growling, are also behaviors that can be used as communication. Our consequences are the events that happen after a behavior. For example, my student likes to play on my phone. My student asks to play on my phone, and I tell my student, not now, which is the antecedent. My student asks why and continues to ask for the phone multiple times, which is his behavior. Eventually, I give in and I hand the phone to my student, which is the consequence. The consequence of asking over and over again are that I eventually provide access to the phone. In this example, the behavior of asking over and over again did pay off. So in the future, my student's behavior of asking over and over again may increase since my student eventually got access to the phone. So let's talk a little bit more about consequences. Let's use your hand raising icon. Who here likes pizza? I'm seeing lots of pizzas. So this pizza may look absolutely delicious to those of you that like pizza. For those of you that maybe don't like pizza, I want you to imagine your favorite food pictured here on the screen. And we're going to talk a little bit more about consequences. We're going to talk about consequences and the why it is not the same as punishment. So an example would be you're hungry, which is the antecedent. So you eat some pizza or maybe your favorite food, which is your behavior. And then you feel full, which is the consequence. So in the future, when you're hungry and you eat food, you feel full. So this behavior continues. And this is a very strong example of a consequence. So executive functions and behavior. It is important to connect the antecedents and consequences of behavior that you observe to your students' executive functions. This way, you can do a deeper dive into implementing strategies to strengthen those executive function skills. Our foundation is built upon our executive functions. Remember, our executive functions are our background players. often overlooked, but a key driving force in how we interact with our environment every moment of every day. Your students' behavior may be impacted by their executive function skills. Let's take a step back for a moment and recall these 6 executive function skills. If you were not able to attend the Parent Resource Center's training back in May, I encourage you to look back at the PRC's YouTube page and view the training called Supporting Executive Functions at Home to help support your journey in this learning process. Executive function skills begin to develop when children are very young and continues into their 20s. So the good news is that we can teach and develop these skills for many years. Let's define our executive function skills. Let's take a look at metacognition. Metacognition is the ability to analyze, understand, and monitor one's own thinking and learning. An example of metacognition is when your student has homework in all their core classes and they need to prioritize which assignments need to be completed first and develop a plan for completing their assignments. Working memory is the ability to store, retrieve, and use information for a task, such as relating one idea to another. An example of working memory is holding a person's address in mind while listening to instructions about how to get to that location. Goal-directed persistence is the ability to initiate tasks, plan and organize time and materials, solve problems, sustain effort, and follow through. Our goal-directed persistence example can be setting reasonable and achievable goals for ourselves. Goal-directed attention and focus is the ability to filter out distractions and sustain concentration in order to think, listen, or watch with interest. An example of goal-directed attention and focus would be tuning out distractions while working or attending to this webinar. Self-control. That's the ability to inhibit and regulate emotional and behavioral responses and read and respond to social situations. An example of self-control would be coping tools to manage stress or big emotions or worrisome feelings that we're having. Cognitive flexibility and shift is the ability to take perspectives, make connections, think flexibly, adapt to change, and adjust to the unexpected. An example of cognitive flexibility and shift would be getting ready to have breakfast and there's no milk for my coffee or my cereal, or being able to be flexible and shifting during the events of this pandemic that we're in right now. We know executive functions do not work in isolation, and they are often collaborating in order to drive our actions in real life. Today, we're going to discuss how self-control and cognitive flexibility and shift relate to behavior. There is a strong connection between self-control and cognitive flexibility and shift. They work together in order to help support a strong executive function foundation. Self-control and cognitive flexibility and shift are necessary executive function skills to support a successful behavior change process. Let's review the executive function of self-control. Please refer to pages 1 and 2 in your participant packet to take notes on these executive functions. Self-control is the ability to inhibit and regulate emotional and behavioral responses and read and respond to social situations. Again, because executive function skills do not happen in isolation, we are going to review quickly the executive function skill of self-control. During our webinar in October, we discussed this executive function skill in more detail. Please feel free to access it on the Parent Resource Center's YouTube channel for more detailed information. Self-control is the ability to inhibit and regulate emotional responses. It's our ability to respond to social situations. Self-control is a skill that develops over time. It allows us to slow down and think through our actions. As with any skill, learners develop at different rates. Here are some examples of self-control strategies. These 4 visuals we've shared in earlier trainings. On the left, you can see the hot chocolate breathing strategy. This is a nice strategy because you breathe in and then you breathe out, which helps to calm. At the top of your screen, you'll see 2 green boxes and 2 red boxes with some green arrows and some red arrows. This is called a contingency map, and it allows your student to visually see expected and unexpected behavior choices and their consequences. Under the contingency map, you'll see a frustration scale that may be helpful for labeling and managing emotions. On the right of your screen is the 10 ways to calm visual, which teaches breathing strategies, ways to take a break, and how to use small movements to help relax. If you're interested in accessing these visuals, they were provided in our October training, so please reach out to the Parent Resource Center for that too. If you are following along on your participant packet, you can take notes on page 2. We know executive functions are often collaborating in order to drive our actions in real life. Cognitive flexibility and shift helps us to change our strategy when we are presented with solving a problem. This executive function allows the learner to think out of the box, adapt to changes, and see different perspectives. Using cognitive flexibility and shift, a student can use a pre-taught strategy to support the problem-solving process. This does not always come naturally, and a student who experiences challenges with this may be stuck in a cycle of repeating the same familiar response to a situation that isn't working. Cognitive flexibility and shift. This is our ability to take perspectives, make connections, think flexibly, and move freely from one situation to another. It enables us to generate new ways to solve a problem, adapt to changes, and adjust to the unexpected. For example, I may make fun of a friend in a group of peers and laugh at my friend. Several in the group may laugh at what I said. The friend says, "Come on guys, let's go." And the group of peers walks away and I'm left alone. If I am to use cognitive flexibility and shift along with self-control, I might shift and apologize to my friend in the moment, which is a strategy I've been taught ahead of time. If I do not have strong skills in self-control and cognitive flexibility and shift, I might follow the group that walked away and further demonstrate challenging behavior. Being a detective and looking at what happened using the antecedent, behavior, and consequence, the situation may look like this. The antecedent is talking with a peer group. The behavior is making fun of a friend and laughing at them. The consequence is several peers laughed at what I said and then walked away. Let's get set up now to do an activity that allows us to test our executive function skill of cognitive flexibility and shift. If you find the activity to be challenging, be sure to use those self-control strategies. So here's our job tonight. Our job is to name the colors of the following words. Do not read the words, but rather say the colors of the words. So for example, if the word blue is printed in a red color, you should say red. Say the colors as fast as you can. It's really not as easy as we might think. I'm going to go first to model this activity, and then it'll be your turn. I realize our microphones are off, so you'll hear me go through this example, and then I want you to try it on your own. Okay, so I'm going to get myself ready. I'm going to read the color and not the word. So I'm going to start with the first one. Red, blue, orange, purple, orange, blue, green, red, green, red, purple, blue, blue, red, green, orange, red, green, orange, purple, orange, blue, purple, green. Whew. Using your hand raise button, how many of you heard my pace slow down? Yes, I really felt the challenge. Yes, look at all those hand raised. I really felt the challenge of being able to shift my thinking and have that flexibility to do something that's very different. All right, I want you in your environment right now to just run through this quickly. I'll give you about 30 seconds. Go. Okay, how did that feel? Ooh, that was tough. It's not that easy. So being able to breathe and use those self-control strategies are very important when we're looking at having to be flexible and having to shift. Our cognitive flexibility and shift strategies. So in order to help support our cognitive flexibility and shift, we need to have some strategies in place. We want to be able to teach expected behaviors to replace challenging behaviors. We want to be able to create visual cues for routines and schedules. We want to be able to highlight any changes to a routine. And our goal is to build a bridge from the unfamiliar to the familiar. The following examples can also be found on page 2 and 3 of your participant packet. On the left, you will see a social narrative about being flexible and shifting in a challenging situation. The student has finished lunch and their favorite cookie is gone. This narrative may be used to teach the process of being flexible and shifting to a different option to solve a problem. The narrative should be practiced when the student is not experiencing a challenge. Or remember, we teach at baseline, which we talked about in, I believe, in last month's training. So here's our social narrative. I usually have a snickerdoodle cookie after lunch. Sometimes the cookies are all gone. When the cookies are gone, it makes me upset. It's okay to be upset, but it's not okay to yell or hit. The next time the cookies are all gone, I will choose a different snack or ask the adult if there is another type of cookie I can have. When I use words to solve my problem, I am being flexible and I am problem solving. When I am flexible, I will feel proud for solving a problem without yelling or hitting. On the right side of your screen is a strategies wheel that can be used as a visual. It can be set up so that there are choices for various behavior responses to challenging situations that the student can choose from. For example, if there's a conflict, the wheel can be used to build a bridge to use the expected behavior. So here's a scenario. My brother took my favorite seat. What are some things I can do? I can choose an alternative behavior response that is expected in my environment. I can go get my comfy blanket, my comfy pillow, and sit somewhere else. I can ask for my turn in that seat. Maybe I can set a timer so we both can have access to that comfy spot on the couch. We will talk further about reinforcement a bit later in this presentation, but it's worth mentioning that when you see expected behavior instead of challenging behavior in any of these scenarios, it will be important to acknowledge your student's newly demonstrated behavior. Also, please remember to have your student participate in this process by allowing them to have a voice in solving the problem and asking them what strategies they may like to try. Another strategy for teaching cognitive flexibility and shift is developing a plan B or an alternative plan ahead of time. If during your observations you have noticed that your student always wants to pick the movie on Friday nights and they become upset when they are not the movie picker, you may want to prepare them with a plan B. On the left side of your screen, you'll see the visual with My Plan and Plan B. The student's plan is what they are expecting. In this example, it's, I want to pick the movie we watched tonight. Knowing that picking the movie may not be an option every Friday, you can plan with your student what their response might be. This is the Plan B. In this example, Plan B is, if I can pick the movie, if I can't pick the movie, I will pick one next weekend. Another problem-solving strategy is the checklist on the right side of your screen. This can be used as a visual for your student to refer to when being taught flexibility and shift strategies. It is important that each of these choices be discussed and taught. This may include modeling and, of course, further discussion of the choices, such as calm down strategies or a list of items that go with finding something else to do. As mentioned before, we're going to talk further about reinforcement, and Rachel is going to do that part next in this presentation. But it's worth mentioning that when you see expected behavior instead of challenging behavior in any of these scenarios, it will be important to acknowledge your student's newly demonstrated behavior.
Good evening, everyone. As mentioned earlier, I'm Rachel Perella, and I am a behavior intervention teacher as well. It's great to be here with you tonight, presenting this fourth component of our behavior series, this 2020-2021 school year, as we partner with the Parent Resource Center and you on this behavior journey. Now that Janine has gone over how our behaviors are learned and how executive functions such as self-control and cognitive flexibility and shift play a role in behavior, let's talk now about how knowing the antecedents and consequences can help us develop those preventative strategies and also helps us to determine the function of behavior. So this graphic should look pretty familiar to you. So why do we want to know these antecedents and consequences? We're looking for preventative measures and also function. And so this graphic here, it looks familiar because we saw this when Janine shared with us how behavior's learned. And as mentioned earlier, the antecedents tell us what's happening in the environment or who was present right before the challenging behavior occurred. This is absolutely a key factor in prevention of challenging behaviors because we have the ability to adjust the environment according to what we have observed. And this is super important. I want to say it again. We have the ability to adjust the environment according to what we have observed when we're looking at those antecedents. So through your observations, and I'm sure you can recall things that have happened in the environment when you've seen behavior that's challenging, but I invite you to, as you learn these skills, to use observations and maybe even take some notes about what you are seeing happening right before a behavior occurs. Was it perhaps homework time? Was it maybe that your student was asked to do a chore? Maybe, this is a big one, your student was told no to something. Was a particular person in the room or did they enter the room? Sometimes we have to just kind of take those notes to identify what really is happening right before. So as you are being a detective and observing patterns in those antecedents to your students' behavior, adjusting the environment becomes important to implement those preventative strategies for those behaviors. So what do we mean when we talk about adjusting the environment? Okay. And if you take a look at these examples here, we might be looking at a task clarification situation. A student is handed grade level homework, our first example, and that student throws that homework, or maybe they ball it up or push it down onto the floor, right? And through our observations, we've seen that this has happened. We see a pattern of this happening. So a possible prevention might be to take that homework and break it down into smaller chunks. How about the next example? An adult is on the phone and the student whines or makes noises or comes up and talks to the adult. And the adult is seeing that this is happening as a pattern. The student could possibly be taught to write their question on a whiteboard. And then let's take a look at this third example. Grocery shopping. And every time I go grocery shopping, I see that my student is asking for candy, might scream for candy. I may tell them no. And so as a possible prevention the next time, I might consider choosing a snack from home to be brought to the store in case of hunger. It might be in a little backpack, or I might put it in a bag and offer that when the student asks for candy or food at the store. Whatever preventative strategy we decide to try, we are implementing that strategy based on our observations of patterns that we have seen. So here's our graphic again. We're familiar with our antecedent, but antecedents are not the only component of the graphic that allows us to support that behavior change. We're also looking at the consequences, and that helps us to support, the consequences help us to figure out why the behavior is happening. So as a reminder, Janine mentioned this, consequences are not synonymous with punishment. I know when I first learned about this, I thought that way, that this is your consequence, right? But no, it's actually what happens immediately after that behavior. Consequences are what the student gets or avoids. We look for patterns in those consequences to identify what we call function, which is kind of a fancy word for the why or the reason behind a behavior. But understanding that function of the behavior allows us to create proactive steps towards behavior change. And there are 4 specific functions of behavior. You may remember seeing these functions at our last training. So we've got some cute little cats here. We have our 4 functions of behavior listed. We have a cat hiding to give us that visual of escape. That's the first function. We have a cat that looks like he or she is meowing, looking possibly for attention, okay? Again, I'm just going to go back to, we may be escaping or avoiding or trying to get or obtain attention. Next, we have our tangible. That's an item, something that we could hold or touch maybe, or an activity, right? So we have our cute little kitty looking at this, this mouse, right? And then we have our sensory function. So let's just say your student plays with a Lego set during virtual instruction. And just to add, during that virtual instruction, they're supposed to be paying attention and perhaps following along with a lesson. but they're playing with their Lego set. So that might be a behavior that's maintained by a tangible. Your student may interrupt you when you're on the phone by screaming, and you end the call. That's pretty loud, so you end the call. This could be possibly an attention function. When it's time to load the dishwasher after dinner, my student takes the dog for a walk and thereby possibly escapes the chore of loading the dishes. When working on homework, a student might continuously twirl his or her hair, possibly providing sensory input. Remember, all behavior serves a function. It's not just for crisis or problem behavior. For example, finishing homework could get my student time with his Lego set, which is a tangible. Going to the gym regularly and eating healthy gets me attention from my coworkers who might notice that I'm losing weight. So here's another visual. We're fans of visuals at Behavior Intervention Services. This visual is just another way to think about function. So we have get, obtain, or escape, avoid. Attention, task, activity, item, or sensory stimulation. Remember, all behaviors serve a purpose. So let's take a look on our next slide of an example of possible escape. The student throws their homework. The adult gives the student a break. This is a possible escape function. The homework is, in a sense, taken away when the student takes the break. All right, the student whines. The adult ends their phone conversation. This is a possible attention function. The student screams for candy. The adult eventually says, okay, you can have your candy. And the possible function is access to a tangible. Sensory. A student has mosquito bites. They're scratching, scratching, scratching. Possible sensory function. So let's take time for a poll. What do you think might be the reason behind your student's most challenging behavior? Do you think that they are trying to get or obtain or escape or avoid one of these three areas: attention, task, activity, or item, or sensory stimulation? And Janine will be putting together our poll as you're looking at this example. We're trying to get or obtain or escape or avoid attention, have access or escape that task, activity. Very nice, thank you. Wow, I'm seeing a lot of attentions. Thank you so much. Attention seems to be the thing. Get or obtain or escape or avoid attention. Then we have access to a task, activity, or item, and then sensory stimulation. Very nice. Thank you so much for participating in that. All right. So all this talk about the consequences and the function, now that we know function, what are we going to do with that information? Because now we know why, possibly, or we're going to explore why, the why or reason. But how do we change that behavior? And the key to this is that replacement behavior. But it's also very important. You can see that we've got our big graphic that says something new, because it is something new. And we have to teach that to our student. So as we begin our discussion on replacement behaviors, take a look at your notes on page 5 if you'd like to add to them. So by teaching those expected behaviors to replace challenging behaviors, you are supporting the development of your students' executive function skills as well. Replacement behaviors build that bridge for your student from the unfamiliar, the new behavior, to make it familiar, to the familiar, allowing them to increase their skill set in the areas of self-control and cognitive flexibility and shift. Cognitive flexibility and shift is needed to self-regulate using that self-control and to make the connection to solve the problem in a new way. So shifting to that new way and adapting to the expected change. So what is a replacement behavior? It's a socially appropriate alternative to a challenging behavior. It has the same purpose or function as the challenging behavior: to get or obtain or escape a void. And as mentioned earlier, it should be modeled and taught. So for example, a student hits their parent during homework time. Instead of hitting the parent, the student asks for a 5-minute break. This may be an escape function. Both of these instances may be functioning as escape. So it takes time and practice, and I love this visual because it really shows that a replacement behavior isn't our end-all be-all, right? It takes time and practice to change that behavior into something that is socially appropriate. The replacement behavior is a stepping stone the student takes on the path of the desired behavior. A replacement behavior is an appropriate alternative to the problem behavior. But again, it is not necessarily the end goal or absolute desired behavior. So we're going to share some examples of replacement behavior. Please remember that the behavior change process takes time and that behaviors are skills that can be taught. That adaptive behavior, the one all the way at the top with the star, is our ideal behavior that we would like our student to exhibit. It's the goal that the replacement behavior leads to get to that adaptive behavior. All right, so this is a busy slide, but it really gives us some information about how a replacement behavior needs to have that same function, okay? So if a student is asked to do the dishes, and we're looking at the interfering behavior section, and they ignore the request, and they end up not doing those dishes, it could be an escape function. But after direct instruction on a replacement behavior strategy, we may be able to provide that escape in a way for our student. So they're asked to do the dishes, but ahead of time, I may have created a visual with 3 or 4 choices of chores, and I have taught the student to pick a different chore on that visual. And so when I ask them to do the dishes, they would choose a different chore than the dishes. So they would still escape those dishes, right? But they would be able to have a choice of the chore that they're doing. Utilizing that choice visual is a lot more appropriate and expected than ignoring my request. Now, this isn't the only piece to the puzzle. We're going to talk further about reinforcing the use of that replacement behavior. We do want to plan proactive interventions, though, before the student even has the opportunity to ignore the request. So let's take a look at our attention example. The student is not the winner of a family board game. If you can relate, please use your agree button. I certainly can. The student may flip the board game over. And when that happens, they may be receiving some attention. That behavior may be functioning to get attention. Now, after I teach my student a deep breathing strategy, when my student is not the winner of a family board game, they use that deep breathing strategy, and then I would provide attention in the form of a high five or a hug, maybe. So again, utilizing that breathing strategy is a lot more appropriate than the game board flying with all the game pieces. Now, again, we're going to talk further about reinforcement and using that to help to teach that replacement behavior. All right, tangible. So there's a favorite spot that perhaps a student likes to sit, and that student's sibling is in their favorite spot. And so the behavior is that student hits the sibling, and perhaps the sibling goes to tell the adult what has occurred, and the student gets access to the favorite spot. So that's an example of tangible. After direct instruction on a replacement behavior, I may actually offer my student and point out a favorite blanket and pillow that is super comfortable. And I may use that as my, I may teach that as my replacement behavior. So the next time that my student's sibling is sitting in their favorite spot, I would encourage my student to use their replacement behavior of finding that super cozy blanket and pillow and sitting somewhere else. And thereby they get access to sitting in a comfortable spot. Again, we are going to need to teach that and possibly provide that reinforcement so that we see that behavior occur again in the future. All right, so sensory. Notice that both of the functions of the behaviors here are sensory. I really like this example. Homework time. My student tends to bite their nails. This could be seen as a sensory function. After direct instruction, and maybe offering a choice of a favorite flavor of a sugar-free gum that might be accessible at homework time, I am teaching my student to take a piece of sugar-free gum instead of biting their nails. And thereby the student's oral sensory needs could be met. We want to plan those proactive interventions before the student even has the opportunity to bite those nails or to hit their sibling. All right, finally, we keep mentioning reinforcement, reinforcing positive behaviors. So now we're going to talk further about that and how teaching that replacement behavior typically involves reinforcement. I love this visual on this slide here. If we are going to increase demands without an increase in reinforcement, we are most likely going to see or continue to see behavior challenges. When this happens to adults, we call it burnout. When it happens to students, we can expect challenging behaviors as they figure out how to cope. So by being proactive, we're using for teaching a replacement behavior, we're remembering this demand reinforcement ratio. And this visual really shows that when we have that increase in demands without an increase in reinforcement, things just aren't balanced. So for example, if your student is used to hitting their sibling when they are sitting in their favorite spot on the couch and getting that favorite spot, we may need to consider not only teaching and practicing that new replacement behavior, but also giving them that reinforcement when we see it occur. All right, so reinforcing those positive behaviors. We can use things like verbal praise and activities and tangibles and gestures. We have to decide ahead of time what that reinforcement is going to be. It comes in all shapes and sizes. It could be that behavior specific praise. And when we say behavior specific, we mean not just good job or way to go. We want to be specific, such as, I like how you used your checklist after school today to get all your homework done. Or, way to go with choosing your calm down strategy of breathing when your sister ate the last donut. Likewise, the teacher shared with me that you participated in class today by using the chat box. Great job. A gesture with a thumbs up or a high five could be included while giving behavior-specific praise. By giving behavior-specific praise, your student knows exactly what it is that you are acknowledging and reinforcing. A special activity, such as a game with a family member, or access to something that is tangible, such as a new book, or use of an electronic device, are also examples of reinforcers. Something to keep in mind about reinforcers is that if your student is always accessing a strong reinforcement frequently, you may want to consider looking at some new reinforcers. So here is our poll. Reinforcement is unique and different for each person. What one person may find reinforcing, another person may have little interest in. Which one of these would you reward yourself with after this training? Would it be A, chips? Would it possibly be some sleep? Could it be working out? Or chocolate cake? Let's take a look at what your preferred reinforcer would be after this training. I'm seeing the sleep, based on the fact that it's, the end of the day, I'm not surprised. Nice chocolate cake. That sounds fantastic right now. All right, it looks like we are ready to show our results. We're kind of evenly spread here on our responding, but sleep is the winner. So if we look at the answers to the poll, we see that we are reinforced by different things. It's imperative to understand that reinforcement looks different for everyone. To find out, just ask your student, observe your student. You probably have some things in mind right now. Be a detective to find out what their preferences are. Your student's voice is extremely important to this process. All right. So reinforcing those behaviors, how do I do this? How do we reinforce behavior? Well, first step is our decide, we label, and we deliver. So deciding has to do with deciding what that reinforcer will be and what the behavior is going to be that you'll reinforce. Labeling is labeling that behavior for the student. We need to explicitly explain for our student what we are looking for. And deliver, that reinforcement should be delivered immediately when the behavior occurs. So, if your student procrastinates at times, does not brush their teeth before bed, right? You might decide that the behavior that you're going to reinforce is brushing teeth before bed. If I'm going to label that for my student, I'm going to say the expectation is to brush your teeth at 7:45 p.m. And then if I'm to deliver that reinforcement immediately, I'll provide possibly a high five and love how you brushed your teeth right at 7:45. So, what replacement behavior will be reinforced? What will you use as a reinforcer? Background. I'd like my student to do chores around the house. When I ask my student to do the dishes, my student ignores the request and goes to a different room. The replacement behavior is choosing a chore from a list of other chores. So I've decided my replacement behavior is choosing a chore from a list of other chores. My student can do the chore I asked, or they can pick another one. Remember, the replacement behavior is a stepping stone towards the desired behavior. And as far as reinforcement goes, my student will access some cell phone time as that reinforcer. Next, I'm labeling. I need to label that replacement behavior for my student. Be specific. Picking a chore is defined as choosing a chore from the chore list and completing that chore when asked to do the dishes. When you do this, you will have access to your cell phone after the chore is complete. And then deliver. Deliver that reinforcement immediately when the replacement behavior occurs. In this scenario, the cell phone is provided for your student at the completion of the chore with a designated time frame. So on to our demand reinforcement ratio. As demands increase, so must reinforcement. As we are intentional about our demands and reinforcement, we can help shape those replacement behaviors while minimizing and preventing some of those challenging behaviors. As demands increase, so must reinforcement. When this balance occurs, it is hoped that we see more of the replacement behavior that we are looking for. So this visual is fantastic as well. Can you tell I love visuals? How do we know that what we're doing is working? Again, we have been detectives. We have been looking at how often this behavior occurred ahead of time. We're now looking to see, is that replacement behavior happening? Are we seeing that replacement behavior increase and that challenging behavior decrease? So looking at our take-home message, behaviors are communication. Executive functions play a role in that. Replacement behaviors can be taught. And we can use a process for delivering reinforcement: decide, label, and deliver. The behaviors are communication, and they are learned through antecedents and consequences. Using a positive approach to behavior change and by being detectives, we can understand that there is a function or reason for our students' behavior. Self-control and cognitive flexibility and shift are needed to self-regulate and to make connections to solve problems in new ways and adapt to change. Teaching replacement behaviors builds that bridge for your student from something that's unfamiliar, that replacement behavior, to the familiar. As you teach replacement behaviors, keep in mind the demand reinforcement ratio. When we have that increase in demands, we are going to need to increase the reinforcement. What's the payoff? What's the buy-in? Without an increase in that reinforcement, you can almost guarantee that there will be behavior challenges. Providing positive reinforcement allows you to strengthen that desired behavior so that the replacement behavior occurs more often. Remember, the behavior change process takes time, and strategies are different for every learner. And we're not always going to be perfect in 100%. But as we work to be detectives and to identify those patterns and celebrate with our student when they are demonstrating that replacement behavior, we see that that effort can work. So with that, we would like to thank you for attending our training. We'd like to thank the Parent Resource Center for this partnership with all of us. And we look forward to hearing from you on any questions that you may have for us tonight.
So hi everybody. This is Mary Beth Harrison Cunningham. I'm the manager here at the Parent Resource Center, and I have opened the chat box. We've also put a couple links in the chat for you to see. One is the playlist on our YouTube channel of all the behavior intervention webinars that we have, that Behavior Intervention Services has provided for us, as well as a link just to our general YouTube channel. So would love to thank certainly Rachel and Janine tonight for their wonderful webinar, and would love to hear from our parents this evening if you have any questions for them.
Thank you very much. We enjoy doing these presentations. And Rachel, I like what you were saying about celebrating our students when they're doing something, and they're celebrating them when they're working towards changing their behavior. I think that is so important.
All right, so we do have a couple questions. So how can you teach cognitive flexibility and shift, particularly to younger kids?
Rachel, would you like to get started?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, so we had provided some examples in the presentation. I would encourage using visuals, especially with our younger students. And again, looking at those patterns that we are seeing with our students. So if you are noticing that you're using your antecedent behavior and consequence, and you are noticing that a particular antecedent is occurring prior to the behavior, as well as a certain consequence, and you're thinking about what that function is of the behavior, I would look to possibly creating some of those visuals that we shared, and the like the choice making wheel, and possibly a social story. Now we showed you a social narrative that didn't have a lot of pictures, but with our younger students, when we are teaching those skills, we do use a lot of visuals. And I also think that the contingency visual that Janine had shown, where if I make this choice, this is maybe what happens, or I make this choice, this is what could happen. So I would think that for the cognitive flexibility and shift, using those visuals is going to be key, and then that reinforcement when that behavior is demonstrated.
Great, thank you, Rachel. So I have kind of a two-part question from a parent. So a parent's concerned that her daughter is taking a long time to do her homework. The mom is asking, what can I do when she takes so long? She's just starting middle school. She's worried that this is a problem.
So I think, again, we need to look at the reason why this could possibly be occurring. For each student, that's going to be individual. I might start with breaking the homework down into smaller parts to see if possibly it's just the amount, and that if she is feeling possibly overwhelmed. I would also look at the task to make sure that it is something that she feels confident that she can do, and also bring in some of that reinforcement. You may have to just have a conversation with her, especially with her being older and in middle school. She may be able to share some of the reasons why as well. I think our students can, often not in the moment of possibly that behavior occurring, but at baseline, thinking about having that discussion with your student to see if you can find out from her the why as well.
Okay, thank you. Any suggestions for replacement behaviors for saying inappropriate words, especially when an older sibling encourages it with giggling?
So it's difficult to to tell you exactly what to do here. I think what it sounds as if it could possibly be an attention function, but without knowing the student, I wouldn't be able to say for sure. But if it is, and you are kind of looking at that antecedent and that consequence, I would look into some possible ways to replace that behavior with some sort of attention function, and that may be tied to your positive reinforcement. It may be having a conversation with the sibling as well. And Janine, I'm not sure if you would like to jump in weigh in a little bit on this one with me.
Yeah, the parent is saying that it's definitely attention seeking.
That's great that we are looking at that as the antecedents, the behavior, and that consequence, and we're in agreement that that would be that attention seeking behavior. So, I'm wondering if we can also provide that attention to our student when they're using the appropriate words. And like Rachel was saying, having a conversation with that older sibling and maybe working with the older sibling to have and create a different connection, not through these words, but for maybe some other activities in which your children can enjoy time together and get some giggling and have something fun happen as well.
I think also, just to add, Janine, depending on the attention, the person that your student is seeking attention from, it could be through that conversation that you have with the older sibling, if it is their attention that is being sought, possibly figuring out some ways that that sibling can give that positive attention to the younger sibling.
All right, thank you. We have one more question. I believe this is a teacher. They have a student that doesn't respond to requests. He doesn't care if he misses recess. He doesn't care to sit in circle time. He refuses to write in his journal when asked and would rather he do it for homework, which I don't send home as homework. He is a loner at school and just doesn't seem to care about anything. What can I do to support him?
Wow, it sounds as if there's a lot going on. It's difficult without knowing the student, but looking at what you are saying, I think that first and foremost that we need to be looking at positive ways to reinforce the student. I'm not the writing piece, not wanting to write in his journal, rather doing it for homework. We may need to look at that instruction, the matching of that instruction with the student. If you're seeing a pattern with it always being writing, and I think there are some unanswered questions here. Wanting to do it as homework, is that homework coming back? Janine, did you have some more to add to this?
Yes, I agree with you, Rachel. There's a lot of different components here, and I would also suggest that you reach out to maybe your school psychologist and your counselor to be able to have this conversation with them and take a look at your student and kind of start a conversation, a dialogue with them about how to help support you. Being able to look at anything that he or she does, and like Rachel was saying, being able to reinforce it. Maybe that high five, maybe it's just a simple smile. it says here that he's a loner at school and just doesn't seem to care about anything. So I think that's really important to make the counselors aware of that, and then start looking at how to slowly, build that motivation through some reinforcement for him in small increments. I'm just taking a look again at this question. Even coming to circle time, I mean, even if maybe he's just looking in the direction of the circle, he may not yet be at the circle with everybody, but continuing to include him and then slowly working him toward being able to engage in that circle time. Maybe even talking to the family about maybe what they're seeing. What does he like to do at home? What does he do outside of home? And maybe trying to problem solve starting that way.
All right, well, thank you both so much. This has been a wonderful discussion tonight, and I know our parents have some great strategies to take away with them. We want to thank our families for coming tonight, and please certainly reach out to the Parent Resource Center if you would like any follow-up, need any other resources. We have those available for you. We look forward to seeing you in January for the next part in our series. And I think we'll put in the chat box actually a link to January's registration. We really appreciate your time this evening, and we wish everyone happy holidays, and please take care.